Alright, what is poppin', people? Take two, because I tried to record this video yesterday, and I did not like how it came out. That was poppin', people. We're back, and in you, ooh, that's a lot of tiering changes we just had. So, if you haven't been paying attention, we had a council vote on, I don't want to say 4 things, despite there being 4 little rows in the spreadsheet here shown, but we had a council vote on several different, several different things. The 2 main components that we'd be looking at here are hail, like as a just archetype, and then Indeedee-male, whether or not to go forward with the suspect test or not. If you recall the survey results, Indeedee-male was favored by a large portion of voters to get a suspect test. And so, obviously, going on that, we voted on it, and everyone except one person said yes, we should go forward with an Indeedee-male suspect test. But more on that later. I want to talk about the hail stuff first, because I think hail, it's not like it's a complicated issue, but it is a little bit more layered, I guess. And since we voted on so many different things here surrounding hail, I feel it requires the first bit of attention here. So, as you can see, there are 3 hail-related votes. You got the one on snow warning here, the ability. Arctozolt, Slush Rush, or neither, in terms of, okay, unbanned snow warning, if that happens, which of these gets the boot, if either? And then Aurora Veil, same deal. Unbanned snow warning, do we reban Aurora Veil? And as you can see, we had a pretty clear majority there as well to unban snow warning. And the reason for this, and the hail stuff even to get discussed at all in the first place, is think back to when we first decided, you know what, we're going to suspect test snow warning. Why did we do that? Well, think about it. Arctozolt, it was banned because with auto hail, it was broken. Aurora Veil, with auto hail, and at the time, 8 turns of Veil because of Light Clay. That was broken. Aurora Veil's always been pretty broken in lower tiers. And when that suspect test started out, for a couple of weeks by that point, hail teams were beginning to make some sort of resurgence, with Arctozolt plus Lowland Sandslash both being really good. Arctozolt much more so, though. I think anyone that remembers back then would recall that a lot of team building really was just, you're either running hail or you're running Vaporeon. It was like Vaporeon, Balance, and Hail were really the only 2 things. And so we decided that Hail in some way needed to get addressed, and we went forward with the snow warning ban, because if we went with Arctozolt, then we have 3 different things banned out from NU that are all basically under the same category, hail related. And so we decided, hey, it makes a lot more sense to just cut this problem out at its roots instead of keep just essentially patching it up, We felt that continuously banning aspects of hail was more like a band-aid solution, and that it makes a lot more sense to just get rid of the weather itself, which is enabling all of these different things. And so what's changed since then? I mean, obviously there's just been more time for the metagame to develop and reach a stabilization point where we can reintroduce a certain element. But Arctozolt, it's been banned from, all the way up in UU. Light Clay, it's been banned all the way up from UU. And so we're looking at a vastly different situation with respect to what our hail-related bans are. There's no more Arctozolt, and Aurora Veil is significantly nerfed with the lessened duration. So we said to ourselves, hey, what if we just unban snow warning? This potentially frees up some, hail semi-cores, some much more budget hail teams to pop up. And we get rid of Arctozolt and just say, hey, this mon, maybe broken, maybe not, but certainly was the reason that hail got all its notoriety back then. And then voila, we maybe have some more offensive ice types in the tier, open up again. When I talk about hail semi-cores, mostly talking about what we saw some during Sun and Moon NU, with Auroras plus Lowland Sandslash being run on these sort of balance builds as, well, yeah, a hail core. Auroras was your rock setter, a Lowland Sandslash could run Sword Stance with a Z move. And then you patch up the defensive holes from there with foes like, or with teammates like Wheezing, for instance. Opens up maybe, Vanillix as a standalone breaker. Whether or not choice specs of Vanillix will be any good is certainly up for debate. But it makes it like a usable at least Pokemon. Hell, a Abomasnow, maybe that one could be viable. Offensive ice types in general are just really cool. And in part, look, my vote may be from a little bit of a biased stance. I wanted more offensive ice types because I think NU has so few. And while I don't expect any of these to take off per se, disregarding the first like week or so that we have Hail back, I'm sure the latter is infested with it. But there's also just the simple case to be made that, yeah, we didn't need to go with this snow warning ban anymore. I think it's a lot more straightforward now for us to just ban Arctovish as the sole problematic element of Hail and say, Veil without 8 turns? Fine. Alolan Sandslash? Fine. Like, Slush Rush in general, I just don't view the abusers we have right now to be broken. And then at that point, like, what? You're gonna tell me Vanillix is broken? Nah. Nah, you're not gonna convince me of that much. So, I think the problem went from being Snow Warning to being just Arctovish due to other bans that Tiers have done. Now, hell, you know, if Arctozolt ever wound up somehow being back in NUBL as opposed to a different one, you know, if Light Clay ever got unbanned and was back to under our jurisdiction, maybe we revisit the bans. Maybe we go back to how we had it, where it was Arctozolt banned, or not Arctozolt banned, where we had Snow Warning banned, only so that we didn't have all these other things banned as well. We could have just banned one thing. But until then, if that ever happens, you know what? Now we can deal with just this. And I think it should be nice to have some archetypes opened up. Again, I don't think things like Full Hail are going to be any good, because Beartick is awful. You're really left with only Alolan Sandslash in terms of a Hail Sweeper. But there should be some decent, at least, options available. And now let's get to the more, maybe contentious part. I don't know. It's hard to say whether an Indeedee-male suspect test is contentious because it was so overwhelmingly supported on a survey where people were able to say, no, we didn't want anything suspect tested. So, let's talk about Indeedee-male. So, here's some stuff here. Let's go over to the sets. So, when you're talking about what Indeedee-male can run, and what it has been running in this short amount of time, you're gonna, I mean, look, these are sets that Indeedee-female could do. Differing moves, sure, but Specs and Scarf are the two best ways to maximize this Mon's offensive potential. Specs is the way that you look at this Mon, or Specs is what you do when you look at this Mon and say, hey, I want to click one move the entire game, and I want to feel real good about my skill. It makes Expanding Force stupidly strong. It means your Mystical Fire, if you make proper reads, is going to be, at worst, 2-hit KOing basically any Steel type. You know, Gleam, it's going to probably 2-hit KO Drapion. Shadow Ball is going to hit the hell out of Bronzong. You know, I really don't see any need for Hyper Voice with that kind of set. And then what Scarf does is it says, okay, Specs is still revenge killed by a couple of Scarfers under my speed tier. Think Passimian, for instance. Think Rotom-Mow. This Mon's not very bulky. It's got the bulk to tank like a Leaf Storm, but that's not a whole lot of chip you would need. And so Scarf says, I'm still really strong with Expanding Force. I can afford to drop the power on my other moves some, and take advantage of this even crazier speed tier. Keep in mind that also will give it the jump on some unboosted foes like Tauros, like Talonflame, Salazzle, Choice Specs, Heliolisk, without compromising maybe the easiest way to break, which is just spamming out E-Force. I think back to the games I've used Indeedee-female in. Yeah, I'd maybe make like one. If you get like one just aggressive read right, there was a good amount of room for that Mon to tear through teams. And so I do think Indeedee-male probably does the same thing. The main thing that I'm going to have to bring into question with it is how much does a speed tier matter? I don't think Indeedee-male's power or coverage should really be brought into question too much here. And the most straightforward answer I can give for that is maybe looking at Espeon. It's not a direct one-to-one comparison, of course, because Mystical Fire is a huge boon there. Espeon can't break Steel types anywhere nearly as easily as Indeedee-male can. But if you compare Scarf Indeedee-male, which is, I think, what's been getting the most hype, maybe? I don't want to put any bets on that yet. But if you compare it to Scarfed Indeedee, I'm just gonna call it Indeedee, saying the male part's too many syllables. But if you compare it to Scarf sets, Espeon actually does keep up in power quite well. Let's go to here. We can just do Calc. Calvin Johnson lookup. That's pretty cool. Indeedee. This should be the one. So here's Scarf Indeedee. We're gonna use a Bomba Snow because that mon is always getting killed in the calc. Expanding force 78.5 to 92.5. I guess I'm like Espeon. Good specs. 78.8 to 92.8. Actually a little bit weaker, which is kind of funny. I'm sure there's some like converging of damage numbers as you get to lower amounts. But we're looking at kind of like the Exploud versus Porygon Z case here, right? Where you have two mons that are very similar in power. It's just one has more speed than the other. One has a there's a caveat to maybe one of the other mons' power. In the case of Indeedee-male, I would say I already went back to calling it male. In the case of Indeedee, the caveat is that, or there's two. One, it's your speed. You are slower than Espeon. And two, you are on a timer. So, if we look at NU right now, there are quite a few mons that spam Protect that can at least pivot into you once. Think like Vaporeon, for instance, Escavalier, if you don't get caught by the Mystical Fire, and instead are taking like a Shadow Ball maybe, or an E-Force. Even like a Copper Raja, Protect 3 attacks, that is a good set on it. Bronzong can do the same thing, where it can switch it on any move, even if it's Shadow Ball, and then Scout with Protect to just go from there. And even some mons that are, if you're talking about like maybe the ideal one-on-one case, where two Pokemon are brought in at the same time, so you get like a Guzzlord in at the same time as an Indeedee. Guzzlord can Protect and see, is Indeedee gonna go for Gleam or not? And all this also plays into like stalling out times of Psychic Terrain. That's mainly what I was trying to get at there, especially with some of the ones there like Vaporeon, that is how Indeedee's gonna try to break it. You can stall out your turns, you can pivot around Indeedee. There is leeway here to that mon. And of course we also mentioned it too, so like if you want the power behind Indeedee, you should just surpass it Espeon. I didn't think I'd ever have to bring up Espeon. But if you want the power, you want to not have to rely so much on predicting, then you gotta go with Specs, right? And Specs will come with its own different set of caveats and restrictions. The main one being, of course, the decrease in speed is huge. No longer do you get to make use of all of those benefits of Scarf Indeedee, jumping the gun on naturally faster Pokemon, as well as a lot of Revenge Killers to sit below you. Now a Scarf Pissimian's knockoff, or CC, that's threatening. Scarf Rotom Mow? Yeah, no, that's picking you off with a Leaf Storm. And while you gain a lot of power, I'm unsure just how much that power matters. Now, maybe as I look into this a little bit more, and when I say look into this, I mean just play more. I haven't played enough with this metagame to really have a great read on it, with Indeedee in it. But the main thing to note is, when you get some mons that are just stupid strong, you do reach a breaking point where more power doesn't really matter. It's like a case of diminishing returns. You could sort of view it that way, I would say. Where, at a point, you don't need more power, bro. You need more, tankiness, or you need more speed, or you need more sustain, things like that. Like, you just don't get as much out of just overloading on power. And I do kind of wonder if Indeedee hits that point. It probably does, at least with regards to expanding force. There's a calc we could check out if we really want to see that. Indeedee-male Specs versus a Vaporeon. We'll even do the 40 Spadef Vaporeon. So Specs does 64 to 76. That means Scarf will not 2-hit KO, at least. So that is a cool damage calc to hit for sure. And then look at let's look at Bronzong as well. We could do Vizdep. I'll put the standard Spadef in there, or the standard insofar as what people run. Let's get Shadow Ball in there. It's going to do a little bit more than that Mystical Fire calc, because this is calcing on Levitate Zong. So Specs has a really high chance to 2-hit KO, and since most Bronzong aren't Protect, you probably do get that KO. So there is that benefit. So you are getting quite a few nice rolls off of specs. And this just kind of does, I'm gonna say like 4 here. Not too many people run like that set. And then yeah, again. So you are picking up actually quite a few 2-hit KOs with your coverage. And even with E-Force versus Vapo, that is a very good roll. But I think the main thing to point out there with specs again is just the lack of speed. And this kind of also plays into something else too. Indeedee-male is not like the easiest mon to position, right? You really do have to make use of pivots with it. And you've got a multitude of incredible pivots, but it adds on to the layer of team support. Like, this isn't just some mon that can like switch into it doesn't like generate switch-in chances for itself very well. You know, if I think like Assault Vest Copper Raja back when it was at its peak, not only did it come in on a whole bunch, but it also was really hard to deal with defensively. If you didn't have like a defensive Flygon, it was probably going to start forcing a lot of damage. Even Jergalgi is kind of like that now, where it's like pretty good special bulk and defensive typing. A lot of chances to just come in and start firing off adaptability Dracos. Indeedee doesn't get that same benefit. And unless you go Scarf, your speed tier is nicer than Indeedee females. Because you're not tying with Croak, you're not outsped by Rotom Mow. But I don't know if this amount of gain you get with Scarf, I don't think that pushes it over for me. And I mean, seeing the specs calcs, Indeedee female doesn't get these same calcs with specs, but it's not that far off. So we can look at the Copper Raja. So we're looking at Timid, by the way, because I think you would, like, if you're going Indeedee, you're going Timid, because you want to actually benefit from your speed tier. If you go Modest, you're outsped then by like a Jolly Croak. You're outsped by Rotom Mow, so I don't think that's worth it. Let me actually check this kid. So 49.8 to 58.7. Yeah, so Modest is actually stronger, I think. Am I just wrong? Yeah, so Modest Indeedee female is actually stronger than Timid Indeedee-male. That's wild. I don't know why I thought it was the other way around. So, scratch some of the things I just said. Indeedee female already kind of gives us some bit of a like outlook into Indeedee-male, right? Where because people pretty much only run Modest on it anyway, it's sort of like Goodra in that regard. Not too many people run speed boosting natures on Goodra because with how speed tiers are situated, you generally don't need one for like those mons that are in the 80 or so range. 80, 85, a lot of those mons do just go neutral speed tier instead of the plus speed nature. And so, if Indeedee-male is so broken, why aren't they using Indeedee female? I say that really sarcastically there, but it is a point that kind of did play into why a lot of people felt Indeedee-male would be balanced, right? Indeedee female is incredibly comparable to it because they're the same Pokemon, just different stats. And given the sets that people were using on the female variant, given where the female variant was ending up in terms of viability, I mean, it is pretty reasonable to assume, hey, look, surely this extra speed and a little bit more power can't matter that much, right? Because again, part of it comes down to, can Indeedee-male actually make use of that extra speed tier? Not if it wants to out-damage the female variant. No, it can't. If the male variant wants to do more damage to the female variant, at least based on what sets they currently run, which again, I see mostly Modest specs for female, and then you have to go Modest specs on male. And then you're losing out on pretty much why you run this mon. Or why a lot of people are hyping up the mon, which is the speed advantage. That's not to say that the damage isn't cracked, or that the speed still comes into play in other ways. What I'm saying, though, is I don't think that you can justify the speed and power as two things that make this mon too much to handle for the tier. And we can also talk, too, about like other just traits of the tier. So, when we talk about wall breakers like Indeedee-male, I like to put it in the category of mon that wants to click the funny button. And I think I've said that a lot of times on this channel where I'm just like, ah, yes, I'm going to click the funny button. I'm going to feel real good about my skill level here. It's like Exploud or Tyrantrum. You have Boom Burst, you have Head Smash. You want to click that move and you want to click nothing else. Sure, you have coverage for the mon that could come in. You might consider clicking it, but a lot of times there's just no need to. And Indeedee-male is a little bit more limited in that regard, in that we have a lot of dark types that are we have 2 dark types that are viable in the tier. We've got a lot of steel types. I feel like in some ways, dissuading the immediate use of expanding force is a win versus a mon like this. And I feel there's enough playing around its coverage moves alongside that to where it won't terrorize teams to some unreasonable degree. The one thing I'll admit that I'm a little bit leery on is adding another nuclear breaker into the tier. I do think that's a little bit scary, because we already have a whole bunch of Pokemon like Indeedee that are slower and do this, so now give them on some more speed. Regardless of how useful you want to say the speed tier is, the fact is it does negate a couple more Pokemon as reliable offensive counterplay, pending what set it's running. And I do think that's worth monitoring. I think I also saw some people talk about Modest Scarf, which still gives you the jump up Passimian, but you're outsped then by Rotom Mow. So I don't really know how much I look at that and go, yes, yes, please. But it is something. I guess it's something. I'd have to talk to the people using it to see if there are damage calcs that made them want to go Modest, because you're not. Again, you will never outdamage Bex Indeedee female with Scarf Indeedee male. It doesn't happen. 50% boost is a little bit hard to compensate for. Anyhow, those are my very scattered thoughts. My bad if it was a little hard to follow at times. I plan these videos out, but I also don't, if you know what I mean. But I do hope y'all enjoyed this, and let me know your thoughts down below on Indeedee. Both variants, just the male variant, you know, however you want to do it. Because I'm sure multiple people watching this did do the survey, so I mean, if you voted to free, not even free, but to suspect test Indeedee male, why did you? Or if you voted maybe like you didn't want anything at all suspect tested, you know, why did you? Anyhow, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.